Hey guys, this is Gaijin Hunter. In this episode, I thought I was going to be going over to Grimm, but I had forgotten that there was an episode that I really wanted to do before that, which was in Sanctuarium. It's very actually easy to miss it, but once you clear all the Sanctuarium for the chapter 1, which is the story of Sympatha, there's actually her backstory which is unlocked, and you wouldn't know it unless you go back in there. So if I go over and I select Hereded Savior, it looks like it's all cleared. But when you go in here, you'll notice there's two stories, Lenixion's sister, the opening, and Lenixion's sister, the closing. This is a long but very, very beautiful, dark, sad, reflective, powerful story. It's long, and I want to end it on that because I think it's a good way to end the video. So in order to give you something else other than just listening to a story and something different from the story-only playthrough, we did unlock all of the entries for Sanctuarium in the lore book, so I thought we would read all of that. So penance for my sin for not including this in the last video, I will go ahead and fight Magusar and get my butt kicked, just so you guys can have a good laugh at me. Then we're going to go into lore, we're going to read about Sanctuarium, and then I'm going to leave you with the final story.
Planning on standing up to Magusar? You've learned to cast spells by reliving the journal. But the world inside the journal is another story, so to speak. The sorcerers in the journal are from the past. Your body, your things, they are not the same. Without strength, you may find that you cannot even escape from this cell. I ask one last time, are you sure?
Yes.
Never before has a prisoner of Magusar chosen this path. You are the first to attempt an escape by choice. Isn't that odd? Long have I awaited one such as you. I had already made up my mind to give everything to a proper vessel.
No, it's all the pages we haven't even read yet. All the knowledge I need, gone.
All the memories, all the experiences of the journal are now a part of you. Now you can use your powers just as you did inside the story.
Yes, I can use my bronze spells.
Go on. Go on. Take it. Now, your story begins.
I think it ends.
Is it you? But how? No. Impossible. My friend is...
For those of you going, what if he beats him? I won't. Like, my spells are just way too weak. It would take me like 2 hours to kill him, I would imagine. We'll give it an honest shot though, so you can see. See if we can even get through that barrier of his though. I have my doubts. No, so I'm not able to break through that barrier. Not that way, at least. So he summoned a whole bunch of fire golems, which is gonna hurt. Puts the barrier up again. A wuss. Told ya.
It isn't easy staying from so do me a
It was just a dream, I swear. Okay, now let's go into the lore. I owed that to you guys for not including all the Sanctuary stuff in the last episode. About Sanctuarium. An organization rapidly gaining an influence and comprised of heretic sorcerers alone. It's said their sole purpose is to save monsters. They purport to rid the world of the act of sacrifice, a direct affront to the sorcerer's code. They are always clothed in white because it is the color furthest from the sorcerers and their black arts. By wearing white, they are declaring their break with Avalon. Sanctuarium, decried as a dangerous band of outlaws by Avalon, are led by one known as Lenixion. Lenixion has a bounty and is subject of an Avalonian order to be slain on sight. However, Lenixion's identity remains a mystery, and Sanctuarium's activities continue relatively unhindered. Lenixion himself stays in the shadows, but his manifesto, The Bloodless World, is immensely popular in some circles. Most members of Sanctuary carry the book with them at all times. The book has been banned by Avalon, and simply possessing it is grounds for severe punishment. There are vast and fundamental differences between the philosophies of Avalon and Sanctuarium. At the root of Avalon's code is the worship of the Druid god of greed. Druidic myths say man was born from desire. It was the Druids who first began seeking a way to coexist with one's own desire, rather than denying it. By controlling one's desire, they discovered the art of sorcery. This suggests that at a certain level, the resignation on their part, for they were unconsciously accepting the depth of people's desire. Once they resigned themselves to the belief that there was no such thing as a virtuous man, Avalon's doctrine of necessary evil was born. That was the main point in which Sanctuarium took issue. If people are born from desire, then it is a taint with which they enter this world. Rather than accepting it, Sanctuarium believes that people should seek atonement. Though the members of Sanctuarium are themselves druids, they worship the god of Romulus, a symbol of reason. Nevertheless, they will never accept the Romulus people themselves. To Sanctuarium, the reason of Romulus is a sham. For if the pacts of the slaughter issued by Avalon were traced back to their requesters, you would find that most were from Romulus. So Sanctuarium denounces the Romulus as beasts who wear a veil of reason, but in truth they only seek to avoid the blooding of their own hands. Both worship the same god, and yet they never see eye to eye. Sanctuarium's primary activity is the promulgation of Lenixion's ideas. His book is delivered to those who are deemed to have the right qualities. For example, sorcerers who have saved monsters in violation of the code are suitable targets. Promising candidates are recommended for a special test. The test is similar to the sorcerer's ordeal in form, but it seeks the exact opposite from its participants. Avalon is starting to feel uneasy about the members they are losing to Sanctuarium, which explains why the Pact of Slaughter issued against Lenixion carries a reward unprecedented in its richness. Lenixion has gone further underground in response to the Guild's threat, and while the taking of a life is fundamentally forbidden by Sanctuarium, they make an exception for those who seek to harm their leader. So it was the clash between Avalon and Sanctuarium turned bloody. People who had turned into monsters are seen as being fortunate to have been saved, but there are lingering doubts whether they have truly been saved deep inside, for it is a miserable end that awaits most. Those who had formerly been monsters are named the Unclean to distinguish them from normal folk. The price of becoming a monster yet lingers in their bodies. Though the Unclean are in some respects treated differently in Druid society than they are in Romulus society, they are viewed as harshly in both. People say that those who have been monsters are doomed to repeat the same mistakes. It is views like this that cause the Unclean to be labeled as potential monsters and treated as less than human. In most cases, they are stripped of various rights and not allowed to return to their former homes. It sounds a lot like modern society, doesn't it? Where there is poverty, there is sure to be unclean living in squalor. They have few other places to go after being exiled from where they belong. Their only choice is to slink into the city's shadows. Those who have been monsters will become monsters once more. Such sentiments express the vileness that is perceived as being former monsters' hearts, a vileness that will cause them to become monsters once more. Most people take it as gospel and fail to see the truth. The causes leading to relapses to monstrous form include environmental factors beyond an individual's nature. One such factor is the stigma of being a former monster, which causes them to be driven to the very bottom of society. It is a vicious cycle in which the fallen can never climb out. The moment the unclean stop to crawl up out of that bottomless abyss, they slip back in and become monsters once more. But there is a group that extends mercy to unclean with nowhere to go. It is the group known as Sanctuarium. Many of its members were once monsters themselves. They believe that no one is beyond salvation. They actively recruit the unclean and welcome them into their group. The unclean who join pay penance for the monstrous past by working to save other monsters and therefore be redeemed. Many unclean still have the powers they had when they were monsters. For example, there are those who can use sorcery even though they are Romulus. Such powers are helping the group save the world. The expansion of Sanctuarium's ranks cannot be explained without mentioning the unclean. The unclean are treated differently in Druid and Romulus society. In Avalon of the Druids, their treatment is dictated by the Sorcerer's Code, which proclaims that all monsters are to be slain. The unclean, too, are subject to immediate death, for they are seen as having escaped the code's sentence. They must be slain on sight if the code is to be upheld. As an unclean in Druid society, it's no great difficulty to hide one's past. For in Druid society, it's practically impossible to identify the unclean on appearance alone. They look no different than sorcerers who have paid the price for using black rites. Druid society doesn't commonly use social registers to record each person's name or social standing. If one cuts off all contact with former acquaintances and refrains from saying one or more than one should, it should be possible to hide one's monstrous past. In the lands of the Romulus, however, the plight of the unclean is far worse. All who have paid the price for their monstrous transformation are forever marked as being different from the general population. It is impossible to meld into the crowd, and it is among the larger sorcerer population in Avalon. The unclean of the Romulus are forbidden from marrying and gainful employment. They are torn from their families and driven from the communities in which they lived. And when problems start to multiply in Romulus society, the unclean are treated even more harshly. For instance, if there are poor harvests, they will often get the blame. There are also morally weak individuals who ease their own fears by fabricating lies about them. Even worse are the unbalanced individuals who can only be comforted by making someone else a victim. The unclean are, therefore, ever made to be the villain and needlessly persecuted. The Romulus Empire even created special residential quarters for separating them from the general population. At the time, there was a rising displeasure with the high taxes being levied, and it is said that the creation of these quarters was meant to distract people from their tax woes. The communities where the unclean are forced to live in are known as unclean quarters, and they can be found in many towns and cities. Unclean quarters are dangerous, crime-ridden places, and many unclean forced to live under such inhuman conditions turn back into monsters. The turning point for these unclean quarters arrived with a terrible epidemic. Because it was highly incurable, patients were not receiving treatment for fear that it would further spread the caregivers. The Romulus Empire established treatment facilities inside unclean quarters. They were isolated from the rest of the quarter to prevent further spread of the disease, and the unclean were forced to act as nurses. It was an inelegant plan meant for show more than anything. However, the condition of some patients started to improve. Most unclean still have the powers they had as monsters, and some are believed to possess special abilities that aid in the treatment of disease. Upon hearing such rumors, patients began flocking to unclean quarters voluntarily. As the scale of this trend grew, other members of the lowest rungs of society, including slaves and paupers, came to live there. It's said that even the unclean of the Druids eventually joined them. These unclean quarters became the only places in the world where Druids and Romulus lived together, and it was not unusual to find children that had the blood of both peoples flowing in their veins. As they took in more and more people from the lowest level of society, the unclean quarters grew to enormous size, large enough to even appeal for autonomy and self-government. The rampant crime that had plagued unclean quarters had markedly declined. This was attributed to a new faith that was spreading like wildfire there. The new faith worships the god of Romulus, but its roots were in the religion of the Druids. However, the doctrinally rigid Romulus Empire was wary of the strange heresies spread. This was around the time Avalon issued a pact of slaughter against Sanctuarium's leader, Lenixion. Few realized that this was related to the spreading unclean quarter self-government movement, which was seen as a grave threat. The teachings being spread throughout the unclean quarters were Sanctuariums. The group was actively seeking to accept the unclean into its fold, and that included incorporating in places where they dwelled, the unclean quarters. There are said to be a number of Sanctuarium spaces in unclean quarters, and considering the size and number of those quarters, the adherents of Sanctuarium there must be growing to considerable numbers. It is said that the Romulus Empire has secretly dispatched a letter to Avalon. In it, the Empire branded the followers of Sanctuary heretics and asserted that the group's leader was a druid. And as such, the problem was for the druids to deal with among themselves. Avalon, too, had been growing wary of the number of adherents it was losing to Sanctuarium. But there was still one question. Should the secret letter from the Empire be seen as an invitation to issue a pact of slaughter against Lenixion? But this would be no ordinary pact of slaughter. It was viewed suspiciously as thinly veiled attempt at political pressure by the Romulus Empire. So it was a reward unprecedented in size was placed on Lenixion's head. Oof. So we've got a very rough society here between Avalon, which we will read about. We still have some more stuff to unlock, so I want to do it all in one shot. But we were able to read about Sanctuarium, the political landscape in which they're in. It very closely echoes a lot of the things that are going on in the world right now, which is kind of scary. Well, then again, these things have been going on ever since mankind had society. But yeah, that is the lore of Sanctuary, and I think it's going to come in handy now that we're going to jump into the backstory behind Sympatha, aka Lenixion, the leader of Sanctuarium. Anyways, this is a pretty long story. It's kind of deep and heavy, so sit back, grab a cup of coffee. Hope you enjoy.
Her parents died before she was old enough to know them. Slain by a monster. Only a brother remained to her, a young man called Lenixion. It was an uncommon name. He raised her alone, the best he was able. This girl, 10 years his junior. His sister, though not by blood. It was only honor that bound them. For he had been an orphan too, the same as his sister. Some years prior, a nearby couple had taken him in and raised him. They had a daughter then, and so Lenixion came to have a sister. He swore to be with her always, and so he was. And though the girl loved him for it, she could never quite forget. She raged at the fiend responsible. That thirst for vengeance saw her awaken to sorcery at an early age. She swore to find the thing that took her parents and avenge them. It was a source of deep worry for her brother. He held to a strange creed. Even his sister would admit he was a peculiar sort. He forbade himself to sacrifice, as if he bore the act some grudge. At every turn, he was quick to reaffirm one lesson to his sister. Forgiveness is the noblest act. Behind his words, she felt he was urging her to forsake her revenge. And though she respected him, that was one lesson she could never accept. She snuck away to take Avalon's ordeal in secret. She felt that was the surest path to finding what she sought. Vengeance for what was stolen away. Without a word to her brother, she put their home behind her. She walked half the night alone. Then, a presence behind her. She turned and saw him there. It was no monster that killed your parents. These were the words that broke the long silence. I killed them for revenge. She was still an infant then. His parents had been sacrificed, and the boy was left an orphan. Their deaths had served to save the village from rampaging monsters. The task itself had fallen to one of the men of the village. After sacrificing the pair, he took in their child as his own son. The man had his own family, a wife and newborn babe. From day one, the boy bided his time. His was a warped vengeance. Why should he be the only one to suffer, he thought. He could move on if only someone else knew his pain. But who? A perfect candidate was close by. The daughter of his parents' killer. And so, he had his vengeance. He sacrificed the ones who took him in, and orphaned their girl. All to look upon someone the same as he, and find some peace. With understanding came outrage. The fiend she sought had lurked under her roof this whole time. He'd stood by her, smiling. Because he could not hurt alone. And so he shared his woe with her. Her anger exploded in a feral scream, and she charged at him. He made no move to defend himself. He willingly took her retribution. It was then he spoke. "Stop there! It's for the best!" How dare he? She thought back now, on all those times he'd preached forgiveness. He'd feared this, she thought, that the girl would learn the truth and seek her rightful vengeance. Despite her slight frame, the girl raged on, untiring. Bloodlust now clouded her eyes. To the point she could not see the fiend that crept behind her. It caught her unawares, and with a single blow it sent her flying. Her brother dragged his broken body to her side. And then he placed his hands upon her. He meant to sacrifice her like he had her parents. She shoved the bloodied boy away. He stumbled ever closer to the fiend. The monster's attention diverted from her, and she ran. A faint voice called after her. She turned to see it pick him up, then saw its fangs crush his head. She ran, desperate for her life. But all the while, her brother's final words rang in her head. Soon, she found herself at the door to the home they shared. It was then, as she searched for something to staunch the bleeding, that she found it. A stack of journals in a drawer. Written in her brother's hand. She could scarcely bear to look at them. Absent parents sorely missed, loss, rage at the one who took them. It was the same, all of it. She felt the same as he had all those years ago. And now she felt the same as him once his vengeance was done. His writing wavered. One page after the next, he confessed his guilt, his agony. By sacrificing her parents, the boy had come to understand. He'd had no choice but to, once their souls lay inside him. The depths of guilt that weighed upon the pair he slew. They had even resolved to end their lives as penance. But each time they desisted, unable to leave their boy alone. His right arm surged with regret. It was mirrored in the regret young Lenixion felt himself. Seeing a fellow orphan share in his pain brought him no solace. His shame and regret made him wish he could disappear from this world. But sure enough, it was the girl's presence that stopped him. His journals repeated one phrase. Why did I not realize sooner? Until someone elects forgiveness, the cycle of hate is never broken. Indeed, as she read his words, the girl felt his same guilt. He'd always preached forgiveness. Not the sort that applied only to him, not a convenient absolution for his crimes. It was a lesson born of regret, the choice he'd failed to make. As she battered him, he'd taken it, then spoken these words. Stop now, it's for the best. He had long wished for death. That was no plea for mercy. No good can come of vengeance. It was a plea that the sister he loved be free from this pain he lived with. But when the fiend had laid her low, he tried to sacrifice her. Or had she somehow misunderstood? Had he really tried to heal her? Moments before those jaws took him, she thought she heard his voice. Just run, he'd said. She'd seen it as she looked back. Her brother wore a smile. Now, having read his journals, she understood the reason. He would finally be free of guilt. Now at the journal's end, the girl sat holding her knees and wept. Just as he'd written, beyond revenge, only emptiness awaited. Why had she not forgiven him? Her brother's words perfectly framed the girl's emotions. She began to claw at her breast, as if to scrape away her guilt. A spiral of hatred. An endless black chain bound tight around her body. As her parents and her brother had before her, she thought to end it. But each time she saw his face and could not follow through. If she died here, what meaning did his suffering have? For what had he persevered and raised her? Every act of hers that followed was a part of her penance. The scars she'd inflicted upon herself never fully healed. But as soon as she was mobile, she took his journals and set forth. Her inability to forgive him had been a grievous mistake. As if to shout that to the heavens, she began saving others. To do what she had not that night. If she could just go back, she would forgive him. And so she saved others now. Each fiend she crossed, she saved. Not because she wished to, but in doing so, she found some forgiveness herself. some atonement. She felt her actions could undo her past wrongs. In time, she found companions, kindred spirits who gathered around her cause. The value of forgiveness was something her brother had found at the bottom of self-hatred. His creed resonated now in the hearts of these new allies. She took up her brother's name, for the credit for this philosophy of forgiveness went to him, she felt. In turn, she cast her own name, Sympatha, away. She appended her brother's journals, making a new book. A bloodless world, she called it, and it became their scripture. Those who wallow in anger are not saved by revenge. Only forgiveness. Word spread not long after. A new group had arisen, and the name Sanctuarium ran far and wide.